Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And we usually end with a more jovial note. Why don't we start with something that's a little humorous, or maybe a lot humorous? AOC, the TikTok celebrity that just happens to be a, rep, a congressional representative, was involved in the creation of a documentary on global warming, one of her bailiwicks, if she has any, and it's basically challenging the Titanic, not the movie, the ship, for the biggest disaster ever. $80 per theater, and I'm thinking, Dr. Lopkin, if they had a documentary on the both of us just by people showing up to the theater by mistake, I think we could grow 60.
Yeah, this was absolutely amazing. It launched in 1,200 theaters, made less than $10,000, averaged $80 per theater for the weekend. That's not per showing, that's for the entire weekend. So basically, over Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, four people showed up to see the movie in each theater.
Pretty much on target. I think if I produce my own movie and I have no ability in that area of just my two cats, like maybe, I don't know, fetching like golf balls or something, I'm good. I'm going to say I could do $100 per theater.
It
Maybe.
it
Close,
really
possibly.
possibly it's really amazing, but this is yet another thing that AOC is an abject failure at. And
But isn't she an abject failure overall? She
yes,
got lucky. I'll give her credit for having the chutzpah to run. She got out of BU, very expensive school, by the way, but always claims underprivileged. Uh, so she gets out of BU, and what she do? She parlay that into a career in business or teaching or what have you. No, she's a bartender. Nothing against bartenders, but that's not. You don't spend, I don't know, 60 grand a year on a BU education to be a bartender. Basically, I have my bartender's license. I think it cost me $200, and I did it at a community college. So yes, she's failed at everything. She's the TikTok celebrity that just happens to be like I said, a congressperson. I think her. We'll talk about stars setting. I think her ship has sailed. Correct.
yeah,
I mean, it's not completely out of the harbor, but that whole shtick's over with.
I I honestly think though, I mean, and let's remember that she has been ranked as the least effective congressperson because she has not gotten one piece of legislation out of committee. And this doesn't seem to bother her. And I have a theory about this. I think her real ambition was to be a social media influencer. And I think she ran for Congress to promote herself as a social media influencer and not to do the job of congressperson.
Oh, a congressperson is well beneath her. She's basically alluded to that fact, and I think your point is right on. No question about it. But I challenge the premise, and it's not yours, that she's one of the, or if not the least effective congressperson. I think she's pretty effective. I mean, who else could chase out Amazon in your district? That's an accomplishment. I mean, that
It
doesn't happen every day.
no, it's an accomplishment, all right, but not one that her constituents has won. And
No.
let's also remember Nancy Pelosi herself explained AOC's victory by saying you could put a D on a coffee cup in that district and it would win.
D for dunce or Democrat? I guess it's
Democrat, yes.
both at this point. Yes. And I like your other as we prepared for the podcast that basically documentaries by deplorables. You want to elaborate that on that for our listeners? I
Yeah,
love
I
it.
mean, aside from AOC's documentary, we also just saw the debut on Netflix of Meghan Markle's documentary. And while it did a lot better on Netflix than AOC's did at the box office, Meghan Markle herself is taking heat because she comes across as absolutely deplorable. And in one
Well, she's
scene,
coming across as herself
yes,
because she is
and
deplorable. I mean,
in
that's not acting. That's just who it is.
one scene
It's
that was
realism.
used in the trailer, poor Harry has this look on his face that basically says, "Oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? This woman is a nightmare and I need to get out of here."
Well, talking about FFs of the decade, century, he's right up there with the 1930s. The name escapes me. He traded the kingdom for a divorcee, famous, pre
Oh, yes.
World War II. But he's right up there. I mean, he screwed it all up, and he's not going to get any empathy or sympathy. It's just you
Oh,
pissed
no.
everything away for a
And
moron.
at this point, there is a strong possibility that King Charles will strip both of them and their kids of their titles. There is a large and growing movement within Britain to have that done and just kick them both out of the royal family. Now, I'm not a big fan of the royal family. I don't believe in the monarchy. I think it's time we abolish the monarchy. But I'm not marrying into the family. If you don't like the way the family does things, you don't have to be part of it.
No, you
She
don't really.
she,
That
she
yeah.
chose to marry into it. She chose to accept the responsibility and then chose to take the money and run. She
And that's
is the
exactly what she did.
definition. Yes, she is the definition of deplorable.
I cannot argue, and I'm sure our listeners, any of our listeners, cannot argue with that one. She's one of these people, like Hillary. The more time with her is the more time you'd wish you were away. Unbelievable. So speaking of declines in reference to AOC and Prince Harry, we have Trump again, kind of switching back to the political arena. Uh, Trump, uh, basically, headline is Trump's support is cratering. Now he's only at 31% with Republicans who actually are want him to run. And I was listening to Breitbart, which is a very conservative outlet, on the way to work, and they were I was kind of a little PO'd about them. They were Trump still, toting the party lines or the Trump line. They're starting to cave. I believe, well, we talked about it last week. He's not going to make it even up to the primaries, just to put more fuel on the fire. Chris Christie, a guy he screwed over after giving him COVID, basically said that Trump has caused the Dems to win. You have Larry Kudlow, who was his economic advisor, and also a currently a Fox business correspondent. I believe he has a 4 o'clock spot, basically distancing himself from Trump. The only one who's not is Kanye, and he was just given the noteworthy distinction. I'm sure he's going to embrace it as anti-Semite of the year. So a lot there, but try
Yeah,
to digest that, Dr. Lopkin.
yeah. Trump's star has fallen. He is done. In a recent poll for the 2024 presidential election, the poll has Biden beating Trump again, but also has Biden losing to Ron DeSantis.
Of course,
So
yes.
so Republicans right now are looking at this going, well, if we keep supporting Trump, we're going to keep losing. And they are bailing on him,
And
and
that's
rightly
without the
so.
indictment that's potentially forthcoming. And even Breitbart was saying, Trump, with all the crap that he's amassed, Herschel Walker, there was an editorial saying Herschel Walker just wrote Trump's obituary. So, I mean, the tides or the knives are coming out. Him with he's already damaged goods. You could put an indictment on that. Even Breitbart says it's just too much. I've had a no mas.
It is. And, if he had stuck to policy, if he had defended his policies, this probably wouldn't have happened. But he had to take everything personally and lash out and back candidates who were nice to him and had nothing to do with policy, and
Yeah,
he
you had
dug his
two.
own.
Sorry to interject just one thing. Yeah, that's a noteworthy point there. More than noteworthy. You not only did, I mean, you could have someone who's on the fringe or blah, maybe not the great. I mean, he had Herschel Walker, basically incapable of putting together three coherent sentences. You have Dr. Oz, who doesn't even live doesn't even live in Pennsylvania, uh, and the only candidate. Okay, everything was going well. Trump had to interject. He has another loyalist because he was on his show, and he goes, said he was the most fit president ever. Yeah, okay, whatever. Um, and the only one who could lose to someone with a major stroke. I mean,
Yeah, I
really?
mean, but the fact of the matter is, Trump dug his own grave, and he's done. He's toast.
I think you're 100% correct. And even Michael Savage, who used to be a big supporter of him, a la 2016, basically came out and said that he's his own worst enemy. I think people have just had it. It's like your friend who's a drunk or gets in fights or you know you support, and then enough you just got to walk away. There's no other way. But again, this Kanye, you know, as someone that works with young people, it's I was kind of a little bit. It's not just a joke. I don't mean it that way. It was never a joke. But young kids pick up. I mean, he makes the social media. He, he gets kids discussing, or it's not completely harmless.
No, it's not completely harmless. In fact, right now it's very harmful because we've just learned in a new study that kids, when they want to find something out, instead of asking their teachers, instead of asking their parents, they're turning to TikTok.
Yes, no
And
question.
if they are relying on TikTok for this, and you've got influencers like Kanye, you know, they believe that what's on social media is true. And
Just like
as
the New York Times would be when we were kids. That's exactly how they think of it. Yes.
and now, I mean, just take a look at the last several weeks of Twitter. I can't speak right now.
Twitter, yep.
Of Twitter releases, 5 dumps of the Twitter files showing how they were manipulating elections, how they were manipulating what people saw. They were coming out against scientists who disagreed with Fauci. And if you believe what you see on social media, you are being lied to. It's as simple as
Yes,
that.
exactly. A very serious matter, and you're 100% correct, especially young people. bel I don't know how it got this way. That's another issue. But yes, they believe it almost verbatim, along with hot chicks doing aerobics. They're both basically equally believed. It's ridiculous. But yeah, so the point is, he's a dangerous reprobate, and I wish him nothing but the worst. How does that sound? Now, on the political arena again. We have Kristen Sinema. She switched. She's now an independent. And there's talk of Joe M., Mr. Manchin, who we gave what political figure of the year. God,
Yeah.
that was a mistake, Dr. Lobkin. But anyway, everyone makes mistakes. Anyway, talk about him uh, becoming an independent. He denies it at this time. But that's like people saying, "Are you going to run?" Well, not at this time. But I'd like you were reading, so would our listeners, on any potential implications.
What this is actually a bigger story than people realize, because while Kirsten Sinema switching to an independent isn't going to affect how the Senate is run, it's the tip of the iceberg. There have been dozens of Democratic defections at every level. Kirsten Sinema is just the highest level we've heard of. Just a few weeks ago, a Democratic city councilman from New York City said, "Enough is enough. I'm a Republican now," and switched parties. You're seeing at the local level across the country, people are abandoning the Democratic Party. And I'm talking about elected officials who are switching parties. And
Well, I also think it's even broader that you're 100% correct. But with that same article, there's also they focused on four other senators that aren't switching parties in name, but literally in action, who have said, this is they're going to be real nemesis for any kind of Biden agenda.
yeah,
So
I
they
mean,
got
right.
D's in front of their name, but that's it.
And think about it. I mean, Kirsten Sinema stood up to a number of policies that Biden tried to cram through, most notably ending the filibuster. Manchin did the same thing. And quite frankly, even though they took him for a fool with the green infrastructure deal,
Yes, they did.
he's not going to be friendly to the Democratic agenda at this point. So, and you put the other senators into play, you're actually looking at a group that could push through Republican priorities.
For their own survival, not because
Yes.
they've all had a come to Jesus meeting. No, they look. There was some. If Trump did not get his fat ass involved, it could have been the red wave everyone was talking about. But still, they read the tea leaves. The let's say moderate Democrats, and they know you escaped the hangman's noose this time, but next time you better watch out. I think that's pretty clear.
Exactly. Across the country, moderate Democrats are looking at where the party is going, and they're all saying the same thing. And it's become a very common phrase. I didn't leave the party left me. And that's exactly what's happening. And we've heard Bill Maher say it, we've heard Jon Stewart say it. Now we're hearing elected officials say it. The Democratic Party has moved too far to the left, and the constituents don't want it.
And I think, though, to that point, which we all agree on, you never know. In other words, 2 years is an eternity. I think Biden's finished. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I think there's a huge yin and yang. There's always, for every action, there's a reaction. I think there's a huge opportunity for like a Harold Ford, a real moderate Democrat, because I think moderate Republican. I mean, people are looking for a true uniter, not a numbnuts uniter like Biden. Do you agree with that? Which
Oh,
he's not a uniter; he's a divider.
no, he was never a uniter.
Never.
He
He was
he
always
claimed
caustic.
he claimed that was what he was going to do. He never even attempted. I do find it hysterical how the Democrats, now that they've lost the House, are calling for bipartisanship,
Yeah,
where
okay.
for the last 2 years they've done nothing but try to block everything Republican. It's sad. It really is. If we could find somebody who could unite moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, that's the person who should be our next president.
Well, we have to address another issue, though. I mean, you're talking about him, Biden being the great uniter. He's also middle class Joe, but there's increasing questions. Obviously, when we look at Hunter and everything, how did middle class or Joe Pail, Aviator Joe, how did he amass a fortune on, more than the average, but not a huge salary? How does that happen? He's lunch pail Joe.
Well, like most Congress people and senators, he had inside information the same way Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi seem to invest brilliantly. The Bidens did the same thing. We also know that the Biden family had been selling access to Joe Biden. And as the Republicans dig into the Hunter Biden laptop, we're going to see just how much corrupt shit Joe Biden has been pulling.
No question, and that's something that's underreported. I don't think by design yet, not yet, because I think when the hearings happen, his whole shtick is, he's above the fray and all this kind. It's going to get really ugly. I mean, in terms of the amount of he's basically his family is this crime syndicate.
Yes, they've made their money selling access to the American political system, which is, by definition, criminal.
There you go. So that'll be interesting to see without any question. And again, on the same, the topic of our esteemed president, it's kind of interesting. There was an editorial questioning, in spite of his success, and you have to be fair, he avoided a bloodbath at the midterms over the summer. Thanks to Joe Manchin, who we gave political figure of the year or month, whatever it was. Anyway, that letter of retractions in the mail, by the way. But anyway, um, Biden's approval is only 43%. And before you comment on that, he was at a Toys. You can't make this up. He was at a Toys for Tots Christmas. They have him doing that because there's nothing. He's not going to the border, and that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. But anyway, so he does Toys for Tots, and someone asked him about his age, and he basically said, "I know how effing old I am," and had to get let off the stage like weekends with all these kids there. You can't
It
make
is.
it up. But the real issue is 43%, and he did have, midsummer victories. I would have to say, he was victorious in the midterms, both from an historical and a current political situational perspective. So, how do you explain that, Dr. Lob? Because I think it's
Well,
something that needs explaining. It's
I'm
interesting.
I'm going to disagree with you in saying he had a successful midterms. Take a look at where the Democrats won. Joe Biden stayed home. They kept him out of the midterms for the most part. Take a look at Georgia. The big guns were going down there. Obama was down there. Bill Clinton was down there campaigning.
He
Where
picked
was
up a couple of
Joe?
chicks, too.
Yeah. Where was Joe? As far away from Georgia as possible. The Democrats had a great victory in the midterms. Joe Biden didn't.
No, okay, yes. Personally, he did not, but he had the appear. He he had some lift. It was he did better than most. I get it. He had nothing to, but all I'm saying is perceptually, he came out with that press conference. Blah blah blah. He did have some midsummer. Again, thanks to Joe Manchin, had some midsummer successes, and the real 43%, and that's pretty much the high water mark because I think with some upcoming economic headwinds and who knows what else can happen on the geopolitical front. Especially when we look at this, well, economically, we look at this winter with home heating prices poised to skyrocket. I mean, he's a very weak president, 43%, given 6 months of relative calm.
He is a very weak president. And the only reason that his approval rating is as high as it is because the mainstream media is propping him up. They don't want to see the Republicans take over. They don't want to see a Republican president. They are propping him up. Take a look at, again, we mentioned the Twitter files. It shows how Twitter swung the election for Joe Biden. In effect, election interference, to use the phrase that Elon Musk himself said. How much time has the mainstream media spent reporting this?
About
Virtu-
zero.
yeah, virtually nothing. There are media groups and liberal groups who have already announced they are going to start campaigns to smear the Republicans who are investigating Hunter Biden. Now, CBS News, Washington Post, New York Times, they have all verified the Hunter Biden laptop. This is no longer a conspiracy theory. This is absolute fact.
Okay, then
And
why did
yet,
51 spies, to your point, because I agree with
yeah,
you, come out and essentially lie? They knew it was true, but they lied to the American. I mean, if we had a real operating press, that's huge. These weren't Billy Bob in the mailroom. These were leading figures that bold facedly lied on CNN and MSNBC and what have you.
well, you
Pretty
know what?
scary.
It is scary. I'm gonna challenge that with a concept that might actually be scarier. Maybe they didn't know they were lying. Take a look at what the U.S. intelligence operations have done over the last several years. They reported that the Afghani soldiers were perfectly trained and they were going to pick up the fight in Afghanistan when we pulled out. They said, oh, it would be months before the Taliban could move in. They said Putin was never going to invade Ukraine like this. They have been wrong so often. Are we dealing with people who are doing political hatchet jobs and lying to the American people, or are we dealing with agencies that are absolutely incompetent and a danger to the American people?
That is a great point. And it's not just yesterday. It's been going on for at least 20 years. All the misinformation about, weapons of mass destruction. Eh, When have they been right? I mean, almost in my lifetime.
Yeah,
It's
I
scary. I
mean,
mean, have they outworn their usefulness? Do we need better vetting? I mean, these people that's an excellent point. Are they really that incompetent? And I think the answer is yes.
yeah, that's what's really scary to me. These folks, I mean, they missed 9/11. They missed the bombing of the USS Cole. They said there was proof that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. This has been going on Democratic administration, Republican administration
Definitely. Oh, it's
for
not yes.
decades. This has nothing to do with politics. This has to do with, have we put together a completely inept intelligence operation?
Politically driven.
And
Again, not meaning these are career politicians that are in positions that they have no business in being in. I think that's pretty much sums it up. Correct, Dr. Lopkin?
absolutely, and
It's the
I
whole
think it was,
Ivy League Beltway.
and, and that's the big issue, is that the Ivy League Beltway. It was, if you've seen the movie Charlie Wilson's War, and if you haven't, I highly recommend seeing this movie. Even better, read the book because the book has so much more in it. But Gust, who is the CIA operative working with Charlie Wilson to help the Mujahideen get rid of the Russians in Afghanistan, states point blank why that the CIA's policy was not to have people in these parts of the world that actually spoke the language, that were natives of those parts of the world. No, they wanted their Ivy League WASP buddies. And this is
Huh?
from the formation of the CIA.
Well, it even goes back to the Vietnam War. There's a famous book called The Best and the Brightest, things that essentially high school history students would know if they studied Vietnam, and that is, all the things that it was a civil war. It wasn't a war, about communism, and also how crazy was it? There was even no strategy to win. The strategy by Westmoreland and all these geniuses was, we're going to kill more of them. What kind of strategy is that? The point is, best and the brightest, the Ivy League Beltway mentality has gotten us into, and everything they touch turns to shit. Correct, Dr. Lopkin?
Yes, and now it's reached the point where it is an actual danger to Americans. We have the intelligence operations, which seem to fail more often than not, over and over again. We've got the military, who they're having trouble recruiting, and now we've seen reports that the U.S. Navy is in no shape for an actual combat mission.
Okay, if the I really am keen. I have keen interest in military affairs. Always have, even when I was in college, and I would say that what you're saying is unfortunately 100% correct. I think it goes across the board to many of our armed forces. but definitely the Navy and others. We've gotten too focused on wokeism and affirmative action, um, plus the military industrial complex putting through weapons that pretty much suck. I think we'd have our ass handed to them if we went to a conflict in Taiwan, in that Gulf, against the Chinese, who have outspent us, outdesigned us, thanks to us to some degree. I think we'd have our ass handed to them. And maybe it's something we need, a wake up call, another Pearl Harbor. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that is it's unfortunately very true, and also unfortunately very terrifying.
Oh, you know, it's
We
not a joke. Yeah, it's
No,
terrifying.
it's not a joke, and this is what's been going on. The military has forgotten that their primary mission is to safeguard American people. And unfortunately, now, I mean, we've mentioned the intelligence community, we've mentioned the military, but now we've got the diplomatic community and our own moron in chief, who basically, in making the trade for Brittany Grimer for the Merchant of Death,
You
has
can't make
basically,
that up.
no,
That is a movie
has
that would do
put,
better than $80 at the theater.
yeah,
That would be, people would come out. It'd be like a bad B movie. I mean,
but because
first of all,
of
Grimer does even. She's the one who took the knee all the time. We traded the Merchant of Death for
yes,
a WNBA America hater. Yeah,
and
great movie.
because we did this, many experts in foreign policy have stated this. This is not, my conclusion. I've gotten it from the experts. This has put a target on the back of every American that travels abroad. Now, if a foreign government decides there's somebody in prison that they want released, they can take an American hostage, especially a celebrity,
No
and
repercussions.
will cave. No,
Yeah,
no
no repercussions.
repercussions.
None. Oh yeah, no, it's quite chilling. And then we've left other people behind because they weren't WNBA America haters. I mean, talk about a woke White House. It's just really disturbing. On the economic front, got to the Feds just raised rates 0.5%, and inflation is from November 7.1. Anything you'd like to add to that, Dr. Lopkin? Any ramifications? Inflation still seems to be, maybe it's not white hot, but it's still raging, isn't it?
Yeah, inflation has started to slow.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the parts of the economy where inflation hasn't slowed are the parts of the economy that have the biggest effect on the middle class. Food prices are up 15%, 25% in some cases. So the overall inflation is only at 7.1, and
Only.
let's face it, only 7.1 is
You
putting it
only have
mildly, because
lung cancer.
right, the average is they were trying to keep it at 2.5. So we're still way above where inflation should be.
And if any of
The
our
food
listeners wanted to look at that, what you've just articulated is 100% accurate. Look at a index, actually a 10-year index, and it is like two, maybe went up to three something. This is no joke.
No, this is, and again, the moron in chief steps forward and says, "See, this shows that his policies are working." No,
God.
this this shows his policies aren't working. What worked was the Fed raising interest rates at a remarkable rate, a historic rate. If his policies were working, inflation would have been cut in half, because then you would have working economic policies plus the interest rate
A
hikes from
thousand
the Fed
percent correct, Dr.
working
Lopkin.
in conjunction. But instead, Biden has actually been working against the Fed and causing more problems.
And forcing them to continue to raise rates. That'll be an ongoing story. And we talk about Democrats switching allegiances, but this isn't really switching allegiances. It's just you have to sometimes face common sense. You have even Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, saying Biden's border policy may break California, obviously financial and probably socially, and you even have Texas uh, Democrat Cuellar, basically saying Biden, you got to go to the border. And then there's talk of Mayorkas, and I hope this does come to fruition, being impeached. Your comments on that?
Yeah,
He should be, by the way.
this is all coming to a head because Title 42, which was the COVID era policy of immediately deporting people, is coming to an end next week because the Biden administration made such a good case that the COVID emergency is over. The courts ruled that since this was a COVID emergency rule, it now has to go away. Well, we just had a record 15,000 migrants in a day coming across the border. That's going to increase after Title 42.
It'll
Gavin
become, it's
Newsom,
already unmanageable. It's going to be
yes,
literally a swarm invasion.
Gavin Newsom is looking at this from several points of view.
Yeah,
One,
2024.
yeah, one is the 2024 presidential election. He thinks he's going to be president. Um,
And I think I'm going to
now,
be Paul McCartney. Yes, go ahead.
right. Now, on the other hand, he's also looking at it as California is a border state, and these people are flooding it. Now, thanks to the liberal policies of Gavin Newsom and his
It's a
fellow
magnet.
California Democrats, California is facing a massive deficit again. They briefly had a surplus when the federal government bailed them out, but they wasted that money and now they've got another deficit. So they literally do not have the money to handle the influx of migrants.
No pun
So he's
intended, but I
looking
would
at
say
this, and
check,
let's face it,
please,
if
for Mr.
yeah,
Mr. Newsom. His
if
political
he
aspirations are gone.
yes, because if Newsom goes back to the federal government and says we need money, that's it. Because he tries to primary Biden. Biden goes, yeah, he ran California so well, we had to bail him out.
Yeah, not going to look good. I think this is an issue that's, again, especially with Biden's in in continuing on my prediction, become weaker and weaker, and just through their own survival, Democrats let it go because of their natural inclination for open borders. But enough is essentially enough. I think it's another
Well,
factor that bites Biden in the ass and calls for someone else to come to the 2024 rescue of the Democrats. But ending on a more hopeful note, big announcement. Something when I was in high school many moons ago was the holy grail of energy independence and clean energy, which is nuclear fusion. And the energy, I think the energy Department of Energy, the Energy Secretary, announced that there's been tremendous breakthroughs on that front, haven't they, Dr. Lofkin?
they have, and this is major
Huge.
news. This is massive.
And by the way,
Um,
Biden wrote that. Biden wrote the fusion equations. Just kidding,
oh,
obviously.
sure,
Yeah,
yeah.
there you go. One goes into seven,
um,
carry the nine. Go ahead.
what has happened is traditional nuclear plants were always run by nuclear fission, which was splitting the atoms and releasing the energy. The holy grail has always been nuclear fusion, which is slamming two hydrogen atoms together with such force that it becomes a helium atom and releases a massive amount of clean
With no
energy.
waste.
This is right. This is how the sun operates.
Well,
This
what do you think
week,
AOC
we
will do to destroy this? Come out with another documentary? The
yeah,
Perils of Fusion?
but
She'll probably think
the
it's a rock group.
the important part of this is that it was announced this week. And we've actually talked about this on our sister podcast, Raw Naked Truth, several months ago, because several private companies have also been doing this research. But they have finally created a nuclear fusion reaction that creates more energy than it takes to start.
Huge
And
repercussions,
that is
ramifications.
the key, because that means it is a self-sustaining system. The energy that it creates is more than enough to keep the reaction going and still create
Indefinitely.
power for the grid indefinitely.
Does that put
This
John
is
Kerry out of
massive.
business? Does he have to land his plane?
Well, that, I mean,
I'm
let's
kidding.
not, I know, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still a lot of work to do, but the fact that we did this is nothing short of amazing. This is the game changer. Forget solar panels, forget wind panels, wind turbines. This is true green sustainable energy.
Okay, but doesn't it fly in the face of the Democrats using the climate change as a way to take control of the means of production, a true communist goal? Doesn't this
Oh,
kind of put a monkey wrench
ab-
in that? An atomic
absolutely.
wrench?
While the announcement came from the Department of Energy, as I mentioned earlier, there are private companies working on this, which is just anathema to the Democrats. Now, I mean, let's take a look at what's actually going on. Our complete energy infrastructure could be handled by private companies.
Oh
Our
God.
space our space program could be handled by private companies. We are looking at a turning point where government is losing more power, which is the exact thing the Democrats have been fighting against for the last 40 years. They don't want, they want all the power consolidated in the government. And now we have private companies that can do their job better than they can.
I disagree. I think Pete Buttigieg, no one can do a better job than him. There you go. Dr.
Oh,
Lopkin.
and by
But
the
go ahead.
way, speaking of Pete Buttigieg,
Mayor Pete,
let's
yes.
not yes, let's not forget the fact that Mayor Pete, big infrastructure guy, big green energy guy, has been flying around in a private jet, creating a carbon footprint that most of us can't match.
In a lifetime.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one question before we go about little Mayor Pete. Um, I think his career, again, we talk about ships leaving the harbor. I think his ship has sailed.
At this point, I think we've seen the death knell of the of most of the candidates in the 2020
Good, I
election.
love that. Yeah, you
Tr-
just really, yeah.
Trump
Basically it's
Trump is gone.
game over.
Biden's Yeah, Trump's career is over. Biden's career is over. Harris's career is over.
Done.
Buttigieg's career is over. All of these people have shown
And
their true
Pocahontas,
colors,
goodbye.
and that yeah, she's done. Sanders
Thank
is
God.
done.
Put the arrow in
We
her. There you go.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lopkin. That was a great ending analysis. I love that. Another great show, and people that want unfiltered and true and outlets that respect free speech can get us at many outlets, can't they, Dr. Lopkin?
Yes, they can. You can catch every episode of Carnivore Bites at the Carnivore Radio website, xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. We'll be back next week.
We'll see you then.